You may not have realized, but the story of Matan Torah is a story in two parts, as Rashi points out at the end of our parasha, when he brings us back to something that happened much earlier historically, and for a very specific reason. Siyam parasha, at the end of the parasha, Parashas Dinin, after the Torah finishes the whole section, Mishpotim, which is all the halachis, and after the Eibishter promises that he's going to send a malach to lead us into Eretz Yisrael, a representative. Because of the pasuk then says, well, Moshe Amar Alei al Hashem Gomer, that Moshe was told, go up to Hashem. So when is this? So Rashi quotes those words, and to Moshe was told, go up. Pirish explains Parasha Zoy Nemra Koidem Aseres Adibros, that this parasha, this section we're about to read, actually occurred before the Aseres Adibros, more specifically, on the 4th of Sivan is when he was told to go up the mountain. I know, in other words, Rashi is telling us that this parasha is placed in the Torah here, not in its chronological place. Why is Rashi? What prompts Rashi to say that it's not chronological? Two things. The two reasons that prompt Rashi to say this must have been told or must have occurred before Aseres Hadibros, which, by the way, Rashi is doing differently from many of the other Pashtonim, like the Barbanel and the Orach Chaim and the Ramban and so on. They all say that this parasha belongs where it is. This occurred after the giving of the Torah. And is actually describing when Moshe went back up onto the mountain after Matan Torah. Why does Rashi not follow that? As the Mefarshim point out, for two reasons in the pasuk. Number one, the wording. Ve'el Moshe Omar Alei al Hashem is a very unusual expression. To Moshe, he was told, go up the mountain. Ve'loi, instead of the more common, which would have been Vayomer Hashem and Moshe. Hashem told Moshe, go up the mountain. As you'd find elsewhere. That already implies that this statement is something that was already said. El Moshe Omar, already previously, it was told to Moshe to go up the mountain. Number two, even more compelling, look at the context. It's logical to say, the section we're about to read is about the covenant that the Yidden made with Abish. The Abish made with the Yidden about Kabbalah Satira. Logically, surely it follows logically that there should have been the preparation for Matan Torah. First you make your commitment and then you get the Torah. So those are the two things that appear to prompt Rashi to say what he is saying. The only problem is, it's quite radical to suggest that something is out of place chronologically without having a good reason why that would occur. Avakosha, it's difficult to understand. Yes, Rashi quotes multiple times the principle that Torah is not chronological. But it still makes sense. That is a last resort. If there's no other way to explain what's going on, then we say this is not chronological. And there has to be some reason that supports why this part of the Torah is presented in a non-chronological order. Rashi himself does it. Here's one example. The pasuk tells us that Terach died in Choran. Says Rashi, firstly, Rashi explains that actually this occurred after Avram Avinu had already left Choran, which is subject for another whole conversation. Then Rashi asks this question. If Terach passed away in Choran after Avram Avinu had already left, why does the Torah tell it to us before it tells us that he leaves Choran? So in other words, he's saying there's a reason why we're going to explain that the Torah is not chronological. Which brings us back to our story. If this is describing that Moshe went up to receive the Torah at the time of the Aseres Hadibros, why, if this is something which occurred before the Aseres Hadibros, and on the 4th of Sivan, why is it presented in a non-chronological place? Mishpotim, so much later. The Matan Torah is in Parashas Yisro. Now we're at the end of Parashas Mishpotim. Now you're telling me that Moshe went up the mountain to get the Torah? In fact, if you think about it, now the entire Seder, the order in which we're told the story of the giving of the Torah, the preparation to receive the Torah, is in a very unusual order. It's like jumping around all over the place, because this is how it goes. But Parashas Yisro, Yisro is going to describe the beginning of how they prepared for Matan Torah. By Yom HaSheni Beis Sivan, what happened on the second day of Sivan. By Yom Shlishi, what they did on the third day of Sivan. And what they did on part of the fourth day of Sivan. All of those things, by the way, explained by Rashi clearly in the Psukim in Parshas Yisro. Included in that is Sivei Hashem al Prisha v'Hagbola, the instruction from the Eibishter that people had to separate from their spouses and that they had a cordon of Har Sinai. Those are the psukim that says that you have to sanctify the people, you have to tell the people to prepare for 3 days, and they should not approach their wives. And then after Yisro tells us all of those preparations, then Parashas Yisro tells us about the actual giving of the Torah, either on the 6th or 7th day of the month. Even Rashi brings both of those opinions as debated in the Gemara. And then Parashas Yisro even tells us things that were told to Moshe Rabbeinu after Matan Torah. Now does it make sense that a whole parasha later, at the end of the next parasha Mishpotim, now we're rewinding to describe what happened on the 4th of Sivan? So once again, you told me it's going to happen on the 2nd, the 3rd, and part of the 4th of Sivan, the 6th and or 7th of Sivan, and beyond. And now you're going back to the 4th of Sivan? That Moshe Rabbeinu is telling them about the preparations for Matan Torah that they have to separate, and he's reviewing the Sheva Mitzvahs that they were already given, Shabbos that was given to the Memorah, etc. And things that happened on the 5th of Sivan. It's so weird. Why would the Torah do this? Not only that, in fact, when you analyze how Rashi explains the order of the parashas, it is extremely unusual. The Divrei HaPashtonim, man, now if you're going with the Ramban or the Rabban El, the Orach Chaim, the Even Ezra, Shaladait and Parshas Zonem Lachrei Matan Torah, who all say that this section in Parshas Mishpotim happened after the Torah was given. Mashanem Lachrei Ze B'Kosev, when the pasuk then continues, Vayavoy Moshe Vayisapel L'Mischol Divrei Hashem Eskol HaMishpotim, then says that Moshe came and he told Eden all of the words of Hashem and all of the laws. That's Koyal Mishpotim V'Adinim Sheb'Parshas Parshas Mishpotim. Makes a lot of sense. Well, you've just learned all of the Mishpotim in this parasha, and now it's telling us that Moshe Rabbeinu said these things to the Yidden. And it actually makes a tremendous amount of sense. On the day of Matan Torah, all the laws were given, and after Matan Torah was over, Moshe came and he told it to the Yidden. Makes perfect chronological sense. Rashi's explanation, how on earth does it fit? Rashi explains Rashi says all of the content of Parashas Mishpotim was taught to Moshe Rabbeinu over the 40 days that he was on Har Sinai, not on the day of Matan Torah. So now you put that information from Rashi together with what Rashi is saying in this parasha, and it emerges that in between the two stories. In other words, first you have the story of the preparations for Matan Torah, which were described in Parashas Yisro up until the 5th and including the 5th of Sivan. Then then the Torah takes a break by speaking not only about things that happened on the 6th of Sivan and the actual Matan Torah, but more than that. But the Torah went into things that were taught to Moshe over a span of 40 days and were only told to the Yidden, by the way, after Yom Kippur. But yes, okay. Not only that, after all of that break, this large portion of time, where all of these mitzvahs were taught to Moshe Rabbeinu, and then he relayed them to the Jewish people, after the Torah has told us that, and after the Torah has told us, after the Torah tells us the part we're discussing, that Moshe has to go up on the mountain, then, parasha, the end of the parasha, says again, then the Eibishter tells Moshe, again, come up the mountain and be there, and I'm going to give you the luchos. And Moshe does it. And Moshe goes up onto the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. That's something that happened immediately after Matan Torah, going up for the 40 days and 40 nights. So it sounds like a complete jumble according to Rashi. First you get the Achona to Matan Torah, then you get Matan Torah, then you get 40 days worth of information, then you go back to what happened as part of the preparation for Matan Torah, then you get told that he goes up to the mountain for the 40 days, even though you've already discussed the 40 days before. So it emerges, according to Rashi, the chronology of this time period. Moshe ascending the mountain for the second time after Matan Torah, at which point he stayed for 40 days. Is something that's presented in the Torah in this choppy, skipping and jumping kind of fashion. So at the end of the story, we're getting told things that happened at the beginning of the story. In Parshas Mishpotim, we first, according to Rashi, describe the mitzvahs that were told and taught over a 40-day period, and only after that, after the Torah jumps back to tell us part of the introduction of how they prepared for the Torah, then you have the instruction for Moshe to go up the mountain to get the luchos and the 40 days worth of knowledge which we've just learned. So if we're looking at Rashi as trying to resolve the misplacement chronologically of this piece of the Torah, we're going to just spin our wheels. Rather, what the Rebbe is going to do for us is completely redefine what the issue at hand over here is. It's not simply a matter of what is told when. It's a matter of understanding that Matan Torah was an act in two parts. Shlomo Abirba's explanation is this. Matan Torah nischachu shnei inyanim. There were two innovations at the time of the giving of the Torah. The one, the obvious, Aleph HaKadosh Baruch Hu nosin nasa Torah. The Eibishter gave the Torah, which includes its mitzvahs, v'hilchas Torah, all of the mitzvahs and the laws of the Torah, Yisrael. That's the first most obvious part of what happened in Matan Torah. The Eibishter gave us the Torah with all of its details. But there's something which may be a little less obvious, but equally important. As a result of Matan Torah, we became the Eibishter's servants. The Pasuk says, that already at the burning bush, the Eibishter told Moshe Rabbeinu the objective of Yetzias Mitzrayim is to get to this mountain to serve me. What's the purpose of Matan Torah? We should serve the Eibishter. As Rashi says, when explaining the first pasuk of that, that it means that you should be meshubad, beholden, subjected to me. Two aspects of Matan Torah. The Eibishter already addressed the fact that there are going to be these two things achieved at Matan Torah when he spoke to Moshe Rabbeinu already on the 2nd of Sivan, preparing him to prepare the Yidden to receive the Torah. What did he say? Tell the Yidden, you saw that I did all these miracles. I took you out of Mitzrayim. So therefore, number one, now you need to listen to my voice. Number two, you have to fulfill my covenant and be my special treasured nation. That means that David is demanding two things from the Yidden. Firstly, listen. You have to listen to my instructions. That's the first part of Torah. I'm giving you instructions. You have to listen to them. Number two, then you have to keep and guard my covenant that I'm going to make with you around the observance of the Torah, which means your commitment has to be the commitment with the full-blown power of a covenant. And when you have that covenant, then you'll be bound with the Eibishter and you'll be beholden to the Eibishter. There are two things to Matan Torah, what the Eibishter is giving us and what we are committing back to Hashem. Therefore, Rashi is saying the Torah is describing the preparations for Matan Torah in two separate sections, even if it doesn't fit the chronology. Parshas Yisro, Parshas Seidim, part in Parshas Yisro, and part in Mishpotim, because they are describing the two different aspects of Matan Torah. Now it's actually going to make a lot of sense to us, because Parshas Yisro is primarily the story of the Eibishter giving us the Torah and its mitzvahs. Obviously, that's Sadibros, which incorporate all of Judaism. As well as the instruction to have a Mizbech, which is a direct follow-on from Matan Torah. As the Eibishter says, you saw that I spoke to you at Matan Torah, therefore have no other gods, therefore make a Mizbech. It's a direct continuation. It's the Eibishter giving us instructions. If that's the case, so now it's logical. If the theme of this parasha is the Eibishter giving us instructions, then the focus about how we prepare for Matan Torah in this parasha, Yisroi, is going to be the things the Eibishter told us we need to do to prepare, which includes mitzvahs prisha v'agbola, to separate from our spouses and to cordon off the mountain. So what's the nature of how this is described? The Eibishter instructs Moshe, and then in turn Moshe instructs the Yidden, because this is the parasha which is all about the part of Torah which is the Eibishter's instruction. Parshas Mishpotim focuses on the second theme of Matan Torah, which is us indebting ourselves, committing ourselves, subjecting ourselves to the Eibishter. And that is incorporated in Christus Abris ben HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael, the covenant between us and the Eibishter, which made us subjects of the Eibishter. So therefore, what are we going to read about in this parasha? The things that got us to the point of creating this covenant with Hashem. And that is the fact that Eden said, we'll do whatever you say. And then they said, Nase v'nishma, we'll first do, and then we'll hear the details and learn and understand. The fact that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote a document of this covenant. The fact that he built a Mizbech and brought korbanos, showing their dedication to Hashem. The fact that the blood of those korbanos was sprinkled over the nation. And the fact that the Torah also reviews here the fact that they had to separate from their spouses and caught in the mountain. Rashi says the reason that's repeated over here is to highlight the fact that the Yidden made that commitment. We're committed to Hashem. So the theme of Yisro is the Eibishter giving us Torah, and therefore the Hachones described in Yisro are the things that the Eibishter told us to do. The theme of Mishpotim is us dedicating ourselves to Hashem. Therefore the theme of the preparation for Matan Torah and Parshas Mishpotim is how we showed our willingness to prepare to commit to Hashem. Now the order of how things are presented in these two parashas makes perfect sense. Yisro goes through all of the things that are relevant to the first element of Matan Torah, or shleimus, in the best way and most perfect way that it could be done, asinas mitzvahs v'dinei HaTorah, which is the Eibishter giving us mitzvahs. And those mitzvahs prepare us to receive the Torah. Because the Eibishter gives us mitzvahs prisha v'hagbola, separate from our families and separate from the mountain. That prepares us for receiving the Torah. Then you have Matan Torah, Aser Satibris, you have the actual giving of the Torah, which is the Eibishter's 10 commandments that incorporate the whole of Judaism. Then Parashas Mizbech, the specific instruction to make a Mizbech, about take of Lacham Matan Torah Canal, which we already said is a direct follow-on from Matan Torah. Mishpotim, and the whole beginning of Parashas Mishpotim is still the same theme. This is the Eibishter instructing. All of the details of these laws that the Eibishter taught Moshe Rabbeinu over the 40 days that he was on the mountain. That's one theme, the theme of the Eibishter's presentation to us. Once we have concluded the entire first theme of what Matan Torah is all about, then the Torah can now focus on the second theme of Matan Torah, which is our covenant and commitment to Hashem. And that would explain why it is when the Torah speaks about Moshe going up onto the mountain, it's told to us in two different places. Because even the 40 days that Moshe is on the mountain still has these two themes. On the one hand, part of the 40 days is the Eibishter teaching Moshe, giving the Torah, the first part of Matan Torah, which is the Eibishter instructing. But there's another part as well, giving us the luchos. And let's be honest, the objective of having the luchos is not, and nobody's going to go sit and learn the luchos. The luchos have only the Aser Sadibros. So why are they there? The pasuk tells us their testimony. Luchos habris, they are the covenant between us and the Eibishter. The luchos are carved in stone that we have this covenant between us and the Eibishter, that we are going to be committed to the Torah. So even on the mountain in those 40 days, you have two parts: the Eibishter instructing Moshe, and the luchos which represent our commitment. So therefore, the first theme of what happened on those 40 days, all the laws that Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu, is told by the Torah straight after the story of Matan Torah, straight after Aser Satibra, straight after the Mizbech. But the idea that Moshe should go up the mountain to get the luchos, which is all about the covenant, that's told much later at the end of Parshas Mishpotim. And now this distinction between the two chapters of the giving of the Torah is something Rashi alludes to with a precise use of language. He quotes those words in the Torah that to Moshe was told to go up the mountain. Rashi Rashi says that parasha was said before the 10 Commandments. There's two questions here. Question number one is, surely Rashi is telling us this was already said before. El Moshe Omar. That should have been the heading. Why did he include the word alei, go up the mountain? Why is that part of proving to us that this happened earlier? It could have just said, and Moshe was told, or even just the words, and Moshe. Because Rashi is going to say this parasha, so you don't have to tell me all the words. You're going to say this parasha. And he says this parasha was said, so you don't even need the word Omar. Question number two is Beis. Why does Rashi specifically say that this parasha was said even before the 10 Commandments? Why doesn't he say before the Torah was given? Especially when you consider. In Gemara, Rashi says, commenting on the same pasuk, that it happened before Matan Torah, not before Aser Sadibros. Why does Rashi do this? Before we analyze why Rashi chooses these particular expressions, it's even more surprising when you see just one perek later in Chumash. Look what Rashi says on the pasuk coming up in this parasha. When the Abisha tells Moshe, come up onto the mountain, there Rashi says this is a few psukim later. Doesn't use the word alei. Matan Torah. I know Rashi Aleph Lo Hetek Shamas Ateva Alei. There you see Rashi leaves out the word alei because clearly it's not relevant to his commentary. And based on Matan Torah, Lo Yaser Sadibros, and there he says Matan Torah, not the 10 Commandments. Why? Well, based on what we've learned, makes perfect sense. Based on what we've explained, Rashi chose these words so we would know that this point in the Torah is now the second segment of the experience of Matan Torah. That's why Rashi says that this instruction to go up the mountain was said before Aseres Adibros. Why? He's not telling us when it happened, before Matan Torah. He's saying that the content, the theme, the message of this instruction to go up the mountain was said before the first parasha, the first chapter of Matan Torah began, the giving of instruction. Moshe is told to go up the mountain, not just before Matan Torah generically, but even before the first part of Matan Torah to instruct the Yidden with the mitzvahs. That's why Rashi includes the word alei in the heading, because he wants us to know that this idea of Moshe going up the mountain, that's what we're focused on now. In other words, it occurred even before Aser Sadibros, physically, that Moshe went up the mountain. But the theme of going up the mountain is the theme of this new second segment of Matan Torah. And that flows into what the Torah continues. Vayal Moshe Aaron, or the Vaviv, Shivim Miziknei Yisrael, that Moshe went up with Aaron and his sons, and there's the Sekanim. Vayira Eselekei Yisrael Gomer, and the Yidden saw, at least the greater Yidden saw, the Eibishter revealed. V'chein Gama Pasha Shalachrea, Vayom Hashem Moshe Alei Elai Gomer, Vayal Moshe Gomer, as well as the next piece, which is that Moshe should go up to get the Luchos. That is all part of the second segment of Matan Torah. Because that is the second theme of Matan Torah. Shalidei Kristus Habris Olu Yisrael. The first theme of Matan Torah is the Eibishter giving us. The second theme of Matan Torah is we are being raised. Therefore, alei is key to the theme. We are connected to the Eibishter. We become His treasured nation. This is being bound to the Eibishter, which obviously lifts and elevates us, as we say in our davening. Now that we understand this flow, that the first part of the story of Matan Torah is what the Eibishter gave us, and the second part of the story of Matan Torah is what we committed to the Eibishter, also helps to understand what's going to come next. Rashi's view, which is not the same as some of the other Pashtani Mikra, is that the instruction that the Eibishter gave to build the Mishkan, Parshas Truma, Utetzav, Vascholas, Parshas Tisa, which we're going to read about in the next 2.5 parashas, actually occurred after the Egel Azov, which is described later on in Parashas Kisisa. So even though it occurred historically after the Egel Azov, the Torah tells it to us before the Egel Azov. Because, as we've already seen as a theme in the Sikha, that Torah is not always chronological. Now, as we said right at the beginning of the Sikha, that needs to be explained. The Torah has to have a very compelling reason to put something out of the chronological order. So therefore, why do we read about the instruction to build a Mishkan before it happened historically? Well, it makes perfect sense based on what we've said, that there are two aspects of Matan Torah. What the Torah wants is to link the instruction of building a Mishkan to the conclusion of our parsha. Very similar to, by the way, what Rashi says, that there's a very strong link between the end of Parshas Yisro and Ve'ed HaMishpotim, the beginning of our parsha. Because the second part of our parasha is talking about the second segment of Matan Torah, which is Vel Moshe Omar Alei El Hashem, the elevation of the Jewish people into a covenant with Hashem, represented by Moshe going up the mountain. Because the ultimate state of this elevation of the Yidden achieved at Matan Torah would be when that covenant between the Yidden and the Eibishter is the ultimate state of that bond between us and Hashem is when you build a Mishkan. So therefore, coming off the theme of the second part of Matan Torah, which is elevating the Yidden, the next thing you have to talk about is the Mishkan, because that's going to consolidate this theme. And he has a deeper perspective on it. Isa Medrash, as we well know, the Medrash, which the Rebbe made famous, Chassidus makes famous. At the time of Matan Torah, two things happened. The higher realms descended into our reality, which is represented by Vayered Avai al Har Sinai, that the Eibishter descended onto Har Sinai, which means his galus hoilikus milmaila lamata, a divine revelation from on high into our lower reality. The second thing that happened was that the lower worlds were elevated towards the higher worlds, represented by Vel Moshe Omar Alei El Hashem, that Moshe had to go up the mountain, and that represents Aliyas HaTachton L'Mayla, taking the whole of our physical lowly reality and elevating it towards Hashem. So Parshas Yisro or Parshas Mishpotim. These are the two themes of the two parshas of Yisro and Mishpotim. Parshas Yisro Ikaruhu Matan Torah Kfishu Metzad Ho'elyonim. Parshas Yisro focuses primarily on the experience of Matan Torah as it is from the Eibishter towards us. Vayered Avai al Har Sinai, the Eibishter enters the space. Vaydaber Elokim Goyim, the Eibishter speaks to us, Aseres HaDibros, the Aseres HaDibros. Mashenke b'Parshas Meduba be'ikar this Matan Torah k'fishu mitzad ha'tachtonim, whereas Parshas Mishpotim is primarily speaking about what it means to receive the Torah as a human. In other words, our perspective, which is Alei El Hashem, that we have to lift ourselves towards Hashem. Akdamas Naisen and Nishma, the fact that we are committed even before we fully understand. B'niyas HaMizbech v'akrobas HaKarbonos, that we build a Mizbech and bring Karbonos to the Eibishter, Krisis Bris Chule, that we make a covenant, etc. So what's the difference between the two phases of Matan Torah? Very important. His galus Matan Torah, yes. When the Eibishter reveals himself at Matan Torah, it is incredibly intense and very powerful, and quite honestly, we all wish that we could have that kind of an experience. The Eibishter's Merkava enters the world. You're hearing the Eibishter's voice. But it's all temporary. And once Matan Torah is over, it's over. But the elevation of the Jewish people, which was affected by Matan Torah, the fact that we become the Eibishter's servants and therefore we're elevated and exalted, that is permanent. Because this is not something that is showered onto us, radiated onto us, superimposed onto us from on high, like Matan Torah was. This is something we're working on, elevating ourselves, committing ourselves to, therefore it's part of us, therefore it's permanent. And that's why the story of the instruction of the Mishkan has to follow the second theme of Matan Torah, because now that we've spoken about Moshe elevating himself, because there's a massive difference between the manifestation of Shekhinah that the Mishkan achieves versus the manifestation of Shekhinah at Matan Torah, as the Rebbe explains in the Sikha in Chelek Chof Aleph. What causes the Shekhinah to enter the Mishkan? We make a Mishkan. It's our input. Because there is a manifestation of divine presence thanks to our efforts, The result of that is the Kedusha becomes part and parcel of the actual physicality of the Mishkan itself. The like of Matan Torah, which is completely different to Matan Torah. Because at the time of Matan Torah, after the Yovel shofar was blown, then Rashi says that is a sign that the Shekhinah is going to leave, and everybody can go onto the mountain. The mountain is now an ordinary place. Because Har Sinai now becomes ordinary again. So making the Mishkan is the continuation of the first step that we make in Matan Torah, which is the second phase of Matan Torah, that we elevate ourselves. The ultimate is when our efforts have an impact even on the divine revelation from on high. Which means when we build that Mishkan, when we invest ourselves, when we commit to the Eibishter's covenant, that brings the Shekhinah into this world in a permanent way. Not another one-hit wonder Matan Torah, but a long-term permanent experience of divine revelation in this world, which is effectively what we call Dira B'Tachtonim, which will be realized clearly for all to see when Mashiach comes, which should happen, take it from Miyad Mamash.